Para nosotros es muy importante tenerlos acá. Estamos además muy contentos porque ha sido un proceso muy enriquecedor, muy intenso de trabajo durante este semestre. Y tenemos preparadas muchas actividades para ustedes durante estos 3 días. Y esperamos que este cierre del semestre también sea muy relevante para ustedes. Tratamos de combinar algunas cosas que tienen que ver con el cierre de los cursos, pero también algunas presentaciones con invitados nacionales e internacionales que pueden dar otra perspectiva al trabajo que ustedes están realizando. Entonces, sin más preámbulo, vamos a comenzar con la presentación de nuestro invitado, que es Chapman. Daniela va a hacer la presentación respectiva de esta sesión, de esta sesión, y esperamos que tengamos una instancia también de conversación con él. Vamos a tener una instancia también para que ustedes puedan hacer preguntas y conversar. Él ya está al tanto de sus trabajos, los conoce un poco a través de algunas informaciones que les enviamos anterior a esta sesión.
Bueno, igual también queremos contarles que esta instancia está siendo grabada y también transmitida, entonces va a quedar habilitada para que ustedes quieran volver a mirar también puedan acceder. Este momento está dividido en 2 grandes segmentos. El primero es una presentación académica del profesor Christopher Chapman, en vía telemática, y va a contar con traducción simultánea del inglés al español. Y un segundo momento es un tiempo para preguntas, para que ustedes puedan realizarlas. Y en ese instante se les va a entregar un teléfono para que ustedes puedan hacer la pregunta y esperar que se haga la traducción para que él nos pueda ver. Bueno, el doctor Christopher Chapman se desempeña como profesor de política educativa y director fundador del Centro de Robert Owen para el Cambio Educativo de la Universidad de Glasgow, Escocia, y también es profesor visitante de la Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso, acá en Chile. Él tiene en la Universidad de Glasgow ha sido director de investigación en la Escuela de Educación, director de políticas de Escocia en la Facultad de Ciencias Sociales y asesor académico principal de la Dirección de Aprendizaje del Gobierno escocés. También fue director del SRC, World Scotland Center, financiado por el gobierno escocés, y también ha estado a tiempo parcial como asesor académico principal del gobierno escocés. Y también ha sido investigador principal del Children's Neighbourhood Scotland, una importante inversión que ha realizado el gobierno escocés en términos de investigación y desarrollo para promover, para poder abordar la pobreza y la equidad en niños, niñas y jóvenes.
Okay, no, it's fine. No, don't worry.
Vamos a escucharlo entonces.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to work with you this morning. It's a real pleasure for me to be engaging with Chilean colleagues on what I think are the defining issues of our time, really, in terms of how we build an evidence-based and inquiry-driven education system. And it's not easy, of course. Is that pace okay for you in terms of translating? Yes. Yeah, okay, great. So what I'd like, if we move on to the next slide, I'm aware that you're all undertaking your own individual inquiry projects, and you're interested in issues of inquiry and innovation and equity. And I'm also aware that we have some principals, some early years, an early years practitioner, and some mathematicians and language specialists, and also a scientist, I think. And I was a science teacher. That was my background, so I feel at home there. And I really look forward to sort of sharing some of my thoughts with you today. And I want to cover sort of 3 or 4 key areas, really. Firstly, I want to speak a little bit about context, because context is really important. And whilst we've been through a pandemic, its effects remain with us in many different ways. So I just want to reflect on that a little bit. I'm going to talk predominantly about what we call a network learning system. And the key dimensions of a network learning system are around leadership, networking, and collaboration. And try and give you some examples as we go through that, because whilst inquiry per se or inquiry projects of the type that you're undertaking are really, really important, they remain necessary but insufficient ways of bringing about systems change. And it's my belief that if we can develop a much more collaborative and integrated approach to our inquiry-based work, then we are likely to have more impact than just the sum of the parts. So that's really the key argument. But let's talk a little bit about context firstly. So if we go on to the next slide, I just want to give you a flavour of my world. Okay, so this is a school in Glasgow, and it's a school actually where my children went to school. They've all left now, and you'll see there are some common features that you will see in many schools around the world. There are windows and classrooms arranged along corridors, almost like cells in a jail, I guess. And of course, then there's a sports pitch outside where the children and young people undertake their sort of physical activity. And of course, because it's in Glasgow, it's adapted to the context. So although it's green, it's not grass. It's actually astroturf, because it would just be a mud bath because it rains so much here, unfortunately. And then if we go on to the next slide, we go to a very different context. We can just have the next slide, please. And it's a school that some of you may know, actually. San Lucas School in Santiago. Is anyone familiar with the school? But whilst the context is hugely different, we still have sort of rooms arranged along corridors, and we have a sports facility, but again adapted to the context. It's a sort of a dirt playing field rather than the artificial grass that we have in Glasgow. So what we see in some ways is a very similar setup. This is about education, and it's about children working together collaboratively here on the sports pitch in Santiago, but also in their classrooms with their teachers, just as they would be doing in Scotland. Then, of course, it's also very different in terms of the history and the traditions of the system, perhaps the resources that are available. But at the end of the day, it's really about a social process of learning and teaching. And that's all of our business, isn't it? That's whether we're a school principal, an early years practitioner, a science teacher. Our mission and our passion is to provide the children and young people with the very highest quality learning experiences so they can achieve their full potential, irrespective of who they are or where they come from. Okay, and that's the equity dimension in this. And I think one of the key ways of doing this is by investing in our professional learning. And if we go on to the next slide, please, we see a staff development day in an early years centre in the town of Graneros. In the fifth region in O'Higgins, and it looks different. It's the middle of winter there. I think everyone's got their coats on, but it's a similar scene to the scene that you would see in an early years centre in Scotland or in the UK. Teachers working together collaboratively to try and learn from each other so that they can improve the outcomes for the young people that they serve. So the message really is here for me today that whilst our systems are very, very different and experience very different challenges that manifest themselves in different ways, our task is essentially the same. And we are in a position where we can learn from differences, we can learn from each other in terms of the differences, but at the same time, we must also recognize that there are some similarities and things can transfer across different types of boundaries, whether they be organizational boundaries from an early years center to a primary school or a secondary school, whether they be professional boundaries, teachers learning from social workers, from other professionals, or whether they be geographical boundaries, whether that's school to school or district to district or region to region, or indeed nation to nation. Yet the more that we can cross these different types of boundaries in our work, the more that we will learn together, and the likelihood is greater that we will be able to prepare our children and young people for the futures that they deserve. If we go on to the next slide, I'm just going to talk to this very briefly because it's quite complicated. And if you could do probably 3 clicks so the arrows come up on the slide. Just that's it. So there should be 3 arrows. Let's just, yeah, that's it. So you know, here we have a way of thinking, a heuristic, a framework for thinking about different types of cultures and their associated public service organizations. It doesn't relate to schools, it relates to public services. And you can see in the, and you have 2 dimensions. The first relates to social cohesion, or put simply, the extent to which collaboration exists within the system. And the second, on the vertical axis, relates to social regulation, which put simply are the rules and ascribed behaviors within the system. And the idea is that these can either be high, you can either have lots of rules and regulations, or you can have very few rules and regulations on the one hand. And on the other hand, you can have high levels of collaboration in the system or low levels, yeah? And if you then think about the 4 different quadrants, so when you have lots of rules and collaboration is also quite high, you tend to get very hierarchical cultures in the system, and the organizations, or in our case, the schools or learning establishments, tend to be very bureaucratic, highly managed organizations. And that's really where Scotland is in terms of its national context. Now, other systems are in different places, of course. So you can think of systems probably more like Chile, more like England, because Scotland and England have very, very different education systems where they have much fewer rules, and there tends to be lots more competition rather than collaboration. And in these types of systems, you tend to get more individualistic cultures where the market dominates, and you have market-based, and if they're public schools, state-funded organisations, or often a stronger sort of private sector. And I would say that would characterise England and Chile. Now, these of course are idealised norms, and all systems exhibit different parts of this culture. What I'm suggesting is that if we are to optimize the way that we work through building what I will call, and I'll go on to explain, as a network learning system to which inquiry is key, we need to develop or build systems where you have high levels of collaboration but lower levels of rules and regulation. And in these settings, Mary Douglas, the social anthropologist who coined this, says that we get more egalitarian cultures. And then Hood, when he applied this, or she applied this to public service organisations, said that we get more mutualistic or self-supporting organisations. So rather than having a system where things come from the top down, as it tends to happen in Scotland in a hierarchical culture, or in a system where the market dominates, where everybody's competing with each other, you can create a system whereby the organizations themselves can support each other's improvement through collaboration and working together and innovating together. And again, this is about working across different types of boundaries. So I just wanted to frame what I say really around that idea of learning from similarities and learning from difference, and thinking about the importance of culture and learning as a social process, and really how we can make connections across different types of boundaries. Now, if we go on to the next slide, we move further forward in terms of where we've been over the last 3 years or so. Of course, we've had a situation of multiple lockdowns and school closures across many systems, you know, with them open schools opening up and closing down at different times. We've had different approaches emerge to virtual and blended learning. We've had some pupils going in part of the week in some systems, or in alternate weeks, or some year groups going in and so forth. So each system developed their own specific approaches. We're beginning to identify the longer term and wider harms that have been associated with the pandemic. In the UK, we're talking about 6 to 8 months in elementary children's maths and English in terms of the learning loss, and significant impacts on the health and well-being of children and young people. And so for example, in 16 to 17-year-old girls, we've identified serious concerns and issues around self-esteem, self-confidence, and so forth. But there's also been some interesting developments during COVID. I mean, it's reckoned in England, for example, that the use of ICT, the use of technology, has probably increased by in around a year or two's time what would have taken 10 years. I mean, who would have thought we'd have been sitting doing this in this way probably two or three years ago. Yeah, in the UK we have a phrase that necessity is the mother of invention or innovation. So necessity is the mother of innovation. We were put in a situation by the pandemic that forced us to work in different ways and think about things differently to the way that things had been done in the past. And we have this phrase in the UK of building back better. What we're trying to do is to resist the temptation to go back to the practices of the past and use this sort of shock and disruption that's occurred in our education systems as a way of projecting forward and doing things differently. And of course, what I've spoken about so far really has been the impact of the pandemic more on children and young people, but it's had a huge impact on our staff. Teachers have had to cope with working in different ways very quickly, isolation, inadequate resources. We're now facing a sort of global economic crisis, which is hitting hard in the UK, and what we're seeing is higher levels of non-attendance by staff than we've seen before the pandemic. So there are challenges around staffing our schools. What we're seeing is lots of early retirements, and people have made different decisions about their life chance, about their futures and so forth. So the education system is facing all sorts of challenges which didn't exist beforehand. So if you go on to the next slide, but what I want to do is to try and frame this post-pandemic period that we're in now as uncertainty, but as a big opportunity. And I want to do that, as I said, in terms of thinking about leadership, collaboration, and networking. So the argument for future-proofing, next slide, please, leadership, collaboration, and networking is something along the lines of the following. The pandemic has stress-tested education systems at every level. And if you think back, I think many individuals and teachers and leaders performed extraordinary acts, particularly in supporting children and families from our poorest backgrounds. Yeah, I know of teachers in Chile who are out around families taking food around and so forth, and there was similar things happening in the UK. But the point is, it's not about those individuals that did remarkable things in the most difficult times. It's about the current arrangements of the system, the structures being found to be wanting. Okay, they weren't able to cope with the demands that the pandemic placed on our education systems and our societies. And what I'm arguing is that we need a rethinking of the leadership and the collaboration and the networking that can support new ways of working. So, and this is where I want to bring inquiry back into it. So I want you to just to think about your 9 inquiries here. And as I said at the outset, you know, as individual projects, they're really important. But if you could connect them to each other and a wider agenda through thinking about the leadership that you have and you can develop, then I think you could ensure that each of those individual projects had much more bang for their bucks. So you'll see the cartoon. This is the only slide that isn't in Spanish, but I think you get the gist of it. Yeah, I think you can see the argument, and the argument is it looks very much like a university structure, and with the vice chancellor or the president at the top, then the senior management sitting underneath them, and of course, as you go down through the hierarchy and the tiers of the leadership and management within the organisation, the poop, caca, I guess, gets more the further you go down. And this is what I argue is the leadership of the past. This is the leadership that was based on hierarchy, position and power, that was characterised traditionally, very much so, in those hierarchical cultures and those bureaucratic managed systems, such as Scotland, for example. And this is the leadership that we're really trying to move beyond. And what we're arguing is that the leadership of the future requires a whole different skill set. And if we are to work across these different boundaries, by adopting an inquiry-based approach, we need leaders who are really skilled communicators, that can adapt their language, that can empathise with others through negotiation, and seeing each situation from a range of perspectives. And that's because the hierarchy isn't particularly clear. So when I sit in meetings now with people that are trying to build a new future, around the table we might have a school principal, we might have a leader from social work, we might have a doctor, we might have a police leader. It's not clear where each of these people fit in the hierarchy. So influence and leadership has to be applied through negotiation with others and being able to see, as I said, other people's perspectives. Leaders of the future will also need to be excellent networkers. They will have to be able to access a range of different settings. It won't be possible for the school principal to sit in their office with the door shut if they are to exercise the leadership that is going to deliver the best outcomes for the children and young people that they serve. They will need to be out there networking in a range of settings, seeking out and connecting with those from different services that have similar agendas and are also wanting to improve outcomes for young people. Of course, strategic and strategy has always been an important dimension in leadership, but these leaders of the futures will have to be able to see the big picture. They have to see how their piece of the jigsaw fits into that bigger picture, and they have to understand the contributions that different partners can make. We've already talked about context. Yeah, these leaders need to be contextually astute. They need to understand the relationship between the organizational conditions on one hand, the capacity of the organization, the capability of the organization, and individuals' behaviors and the relationship with outcomes in that sense as well. What capacity do individuals within the organization have to change or have to think about new ideas? Because we know all very often that the first response to change or doing things differently is to reject it, to put the barriers up, say, oh no, let's carry on as before. But as I've said, if we are to rise to the challenges of the future, we need to do things differently. And that means problem solving, thinking laterally, thinking creatively, using evidence through your inquiries to seek solutions and make decisions. So we're no longer making decisions based on hunches or doing things because that's the way that we've always done them. We're shedding new light onto the problems that we're facing through the systematic collection of different types of information and data, which give us new insights through the inquiry process into what the evidence is telling us and also what might be done about it as we enact change. And of course, finally, people need the motivation. They need to be self-managing. These leaders of the future are innovators, like yourselves. They're risk takers, but they don't take risks without understanding that for every risk you take, there's a potential consequence. So they take risks, but within a framework of what is the art of the possible. And of course, that goes back to understanding organizational capacity and culture. So that's the argument for a new type of leadership. I now want to move on and just to talk a little bit about collaboration and networking. So just think about your 9 individual projects as we go through this, your inquiry projects, and think about if somehow you could connect those projects together to different types of to different inquiries, maybe through thematic themes, for example, and what you could achieve with combining resources and thinking by collaborating with each other. Now, collaboration is a very easy word to use and an easy concept to understand. It's pretty difficult to do. And we can think about different levels of collaboration. So at the lowest level, you can think about the sort of traditional pattern of what we've called association, where people work together with incidental meetings, often initiated through that traditional hierarchy. And there's very little sort of sharing of knowledge or resources. They're talking shops, we use the phrase. We'll also probably all have experienced what we've called sort of cooperation, where you get short-term, task-focused activity that coalesce around a specific issue, and that usually generates some sort of sharing of knowledge or resources on specific issues, but tends to be here today and gone tomorrow. Not a very sustainable way of collaborating. A more sustainable way is thinking about ways of working that are held together by a common set of values, a commitment to sharing knowledge and resources and practice. And that usually involves some sort of development of new practice. In the literature, Michael Fielding, many years ago now, spoke about joint practice development. And that's really what you're undertaking through developing an inquiry project, which one would hope would evolve into taking an inquiring stance into everything that you do in your work. And then perhaps the highest level of collaboration is we would term collegiality, where you have a long-term commitment to the shared enterprise, and that's really held together not only by a set of values, but also a long-term vision, where that you understand that collaboration, successful collaboration, involves both giving and taking, and there will be times when you're conceding resources, power and influence, and there may be other times when you're gaining. But this is about having a long-term vision and commitment underpinned by a set of shared values. And that's really what I think we should be aiming for as we try and build this idea of a network learning system. So we've got a new form of leadership. We've got a way of thinking positively about collaboration. But then if we go on to the next slide, we can also see that there's a massive downside to collaboration. We can have what I call the illusion of association. We've all been in meetings, haven't we, where there's sort of passive buy-in by a sleeping partner. Somebody's there in body, but they're not there in mind. They're doing their emails or they're checking something else. They're there just to be seen to be there. A perhaps more dangerous type of collaboration, or perhaps it's collusion, is the idea of fabricated cooperation, whereby people go to a meeting or appear to be working to each other, but they're only there to pursue their own agenda, often at the expense of others. So it's about widening their influence and seeking to gain greater resources. Interestingly, there's this idea of sort of collaboration or collusion, perhaps with the enemy, where people engage in partnership working in an attempt to control the damage that might be done to their own situation. But in the end, this does turn, in fact, into inclusion. They become trapped by the discourse, and they actually often become part of the problem by exacerbating the discourse and ending up promoting the very thing that they entered or were aimed to stop doing. And then perhaps for me, there's the very worst type or negative aspect of collaboration. That's contrived collegiality, and it's often seen in our senior-most leaders, where these people have usually quite a large audience and a captive audience at that. And what we often see is a false expression of values and belief systems. And this is particularly prevalent where there's an imbalance in power and control. And of course, these people are talking about one world, but then behaving in a very different way. Their actions don't meet the words that they're saying. Okay, they talk the talk, some would say, but they can't walk the walk, is a phrase that we have in English. I'm not sure whether that translates. So what I'm arguing is that we have to be conscious of both sides of the both positive and the negative aspects of collaboration. So if we go on and skip the, well, if you go on to the next slide, yeah. So in summary, the argument is the pandemic stress tested our systems. Current arrangements have been found wanting. And what we need, as I've argued, is a new way of thinking about the leadership and the collaboration and networking. And for me, the way that we will create more equitable education systems that can support all our learners is by the development of this idea that we've called a network learning system. And if you go on to the next slide, you can see why this is so relevant to the work that you are undertaking now. So a network learning system is a research practice partnership, and it doesn't mean it has to be a university and practice or school partnership. It has to be a partnership that involves research, and by that I mean inquiry and practice, that is connected through networks across different types of boundaries. We've used this word boundary quite a lot over the last 35 minutes or so. And these boundaries may be physical, it may be across classrooms, maybe across organizations, or it may be across, as I said, districts or regions, and it may be across professions, of course. So it could be across professional boundaries, whether it be education, social work, or it may be early years, elementary and secondary school. It may be across subject areas. wouldn't it be great if our maths departments in secondary schools worked much more collaboratively with our science departments? So the first point about the network learning system is having the mindset that supports you to work across different types of boundaries. And the second point, which hones right in on your master's work, is that this is driven by design-based research and collaborative inquiry to innovate, test and refine practices, and at the same time build leadership capacity through practice-based professional learning. And I'm sure that's what you're doing when I look at your inquiry questions, whether it be to how to implement leadership practices in a school in the northwestern sector of Santiago to develop intercultural skills that promote symmetrical cultural dialogue, or whether it be the inquiry question that's developing the work of language and communication with grade 10 teachers, or whether it's about improving pedagogical practices to achieve the acquisition of reading and writing through play. In a sense, it doesn't matter, but what you're doing is you're collecting evidence, you're inquiring and reflecting into your practice in order to develop new practices, that idea of joint practice development. And at the same time, you are building leadership capacity because you're working with people in different roles and different ways than you have done before. But as I've said previously, the really important point is that this is working across different types of boundaries. And this can be across classrooms, schools, and professions, I've said before. So really think about not only working across boundaries, but also moving from taking an individual approach to your inquiry as a project to thinking about a collaborative inquiring stance. So thinking about inquiry as a way of being rather than the project, for me, is the next level. And then what I want to say, I want to just jump 2 slides, please, and then I'll stop because I'm conscious of the time. So, and next slide again, please. So really, the key principles, back one, that's it, the key principles sort of underpinning this idea of a network learning system is that learning is primarily a social process, that everybody can learn and achieve irrespective of their starting point. I suspect within the 9 of you, there will be some of you that have done quite a lot of research and inquiry in the past. There may be others that this is quite new, but that doesn't matter. The point is everybody has something to contribute and we can learn from each other. Learning is outcome focused. Okay, so we're not just doing this for the point of it. The purpose is improving practice so that that practice can have an impact on the outcomes of children and young people that we serve. And the innovation and improvement are the core goals. It's about reframing it and doing things differently. Learning occurs at all levels within a nested system. So we talk about within schools, between schools, and beyond schools. I've already said everybody has something to learn. And then perhaps the most important point is underpinned by systematic collaborative inquiry. So inquiry and evidence are key, and they take many different forms. It's not about relying on or privileging a particular type of evidence. It's about building a big picture through your inquiry by drawing on different sources of data and evidence. And of course, finally, learning takes a critical but action-oriented stance. So critical perspectives and change support development. We don't think, we aren't finishing where we need to be. We're always at the start of an ongoing journey. So we all must be critical about our work and assume that things can be improved for the better within the resources, the culture and the context that we're operating. So I'm going to stop there and we'll perhaps open it up for questions for 10, 15 more minutes or so. But I hope you can take away the big idea from this, that we can build a better future by rethinking how we do leadership, by working with each other and collaborating across different types of boundaries, and moving from the really important work that we're doing in undertaking an inquiry project to thinking about our identity as professionals as being underpinned by taking an inquiring stance to our work. So many thanks. I'll be really interested in your thoughts, comments, or questions that you may have, and I'll do my best with them through the translation. Thank you. Beatrice.
Ahora tenemos un tiempo bien breve para preguntas. Quien quiera realizar una pregunta tiene que hacerlo al micrófono para que podamos hacer la traducción a nuestro invitado.
Deathly silence.
Una pregunta por acá o comentario de algo que les provoque la presentación.
Bueno, yo no había asociado el nombre de Christopher Chapman hasta que vi la portada del libro, y nosotros hemos leído bastante de su literatura porque trabaja harto de la inclusión con la ISO. Entonces hemos leído bastante al respecto a eso, de la equidad, de la inclusión, y ahora estoy más emocionada porque uno no lee la literatura, pero nunca había pensado que iba a tener la oportunidad de comentarle esto y también de preguntarle. Pero nosotros hemos trabajado harto la indagación, el trabajo en red, acá en el programa. Tomamos el electivo de redes colaborativas, y la verdad es que nosotros no habíamos, como establecimiento de trabajo en un colegio técnico, nunca habíamos aplicado el concepto de red dentro de la escuela. Lo habíamos trabajado siempre como asociarse con otra escuela, y la verdad es que uno es bien reacio como directivo a hacerlo porque somos como entorno bien protegido. Yo trabajo en un colegio particular, no trabajo en un colegio municipal que está como acostumbrado a tener redes colaborativas. Entonces, aplicarlo al aula para nosotros fue como importante, pero más que todo lo hemos hecho a nivel directivo. O sea, que la participación sea real. O sea, muchas veces acude a los colegas, más o menos todo decidido, todo cocinado, y nos genera una ilusión de que están los demás participando, cuando al final básicamente uno lo hace por cumplir, porque ya tiene todo listo. Pero es increíble cómo uno coincide muchas veces con los colegas pensando que estamos de una perspectiva distinta, y no es así, porque al final uno se da cuenta que tiene más cosas en común con ellos que la perspectiva de educación que lo que uno pensaba. Y ahí mi pregunta es un contexto para mí, que trabajo en un establecimiento técnico profesional, de cómo fortalecer el trabajo en red dentro de los equipos directivos. Eso.
Hacemos una segunda pregunta inmediatamente para que recojan.
So, I mean, yeah, thank you for those very, very kind words. And I think strengthening networking is really about building a set of relationships that are underpinned by trust and mutual respect. And that's much easier said than done, especially when we live in a relatively high stakes, accountability driven system that's underpinned by large amounts of competition. So, you know, I would really try and think about developing a set of relationships whereby those that are involved in the network can see some quick wins. They can see something positive happening very quickly, which can support the generation of stronger and more trusting relationships. that's the social side, I think. There's also a technical side, and that's by establishing a set of routines and expectations that are grounded in a set of structures and processes which create a rhythm to the networking. So after a while, the way that people work doesn't feel new. It's just something that is done. It becomes the normal way of doing things. It becomes embedded and ingrained into the culture. And well, in fact, Mark Hadfield and I wrote a book about this in 2009. It was called, the book was by Routledge. It was called Leading School-Based Networks. And that at the end of each chapter, that has a very practical, probably only in English, unfortunately, but has a very set of practical activities that school leaders can use to build more effective networks within and across their schools. So thanks for that question. That was really interesting, and good luck, because it isn't easy. And I think you all know as practitioners engaging with this on a day-to-day basis that it's really challenging work. But the rewards are great too.
Ahora sí. Bueno, me hizo mucho sentido el tema del trabajo colaborativo y de, claro, pues es muy fácil hablar de colaboración, pero finalmente muchas veces se hace por cumplir. De hecho, en el lugar donde me encuentro trabajando, bueno, yo trabajo en el norte de Chile, ocurre mucho esto y esta, como dijo usted, esta parte como negativa de la colaboración, de la ilusión, de la asociación y todo eso, y que muchas veces están todos trabajando como para sus propios fines, o sea, colaboran entre sí, pero para su propio, entre comillas, beneficio. En todo caso, bueno, eso en mi colegio lo veo bastante. Hay muchas cosas que se hacen por cumplir y no tiene, o al menos propósitos más profundos a largo plazo, como usted señalaba. Ahora, esto lo relaciono con lo que dijo al principio, de que al menos en Chile el sistema es bastante individual, entonces, o individualista. Entonces, mi pregunta va, ¿cómo nosotros, al menos de nuestro espacio educativo, en nuestras comunidades educativas, podemos hacer frente a esta lógica individualista que es sistémica, o sea, que es estructural, que el sistema educacional chileno está así? Entonces, ¿cómo nosotros, entre comillas, nos asociamos a contramarea?
That's
Eso.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an excellent question. I mean, all I would say in response is that I've been fortunate enough to be in many Chilean schools and work with a number of Chilean teachers who, despite the broader context, are managing to do some remarkable work together through some of the networks that they're part of. So, I think there is an optimistic version of the challenges of working in, as you say, a very individualized system. And I think some of the going back to Bachelet's term, I think some of the things that were seeded have the potential to actually push back against that individualized culture, and not everywhere, not all of the time, but if you can spot and identify the places, the individuals within the system where there is an appetite to work in different ways to create a better future, then starting small, and it might be 3 people in one department. So starting small and then building momentum slowly over time, so people want to be part of the club. My experience working around the world is when teachers see that they're making a difference to the outcomes and the life chances of children and young people, that's when they really invest in things. And if you can create a situation as a school leader or a departmental leader whereby teachers can see that working together reaps rewards and benefits that are greater than trying to do things by yourself, that's a small but really important stepping stone on that journey to building a more networked learning system. But you're right, we have to be realistic about the challenges that are presented by working in different systems. And one thing that I would say about being realistic is that the better we understand the challenges that we face, the easier it is to deal with those barriers. So the more that you understand them, the more likelihood that you'll be able to navigate or find a route through them. But on a very practical level, spotting some individuals that really think differently and are prepared to innovate as you are on this program, by not accepting the way that things have been done in the past.
Le damos las gracias a Christopher Chapman por acompañarnos hoy día. Le reiteramos un aplauso por su presentación. Así que muchas gracias por acompañarnos y muchas de los conceptos y algunas ideas que señalaste en tu presentación van a guiar el trabajo de hoy. Así que muchas gracias.
No, thank you all, and good luck with the rest of your course. It's been a real pleasure to meet you, albeit from 7,000 miles away. Well, I wish I was with you in Chile, but another time maybe. Many thanks. Okay. Enjoy the rest of the day, folks. I'm going, okay?